less or about 25% of this that goes for something that we would deem infrastructure. Tennesseans love to talk about infrastructure as 4 things, and they talk about roads, rivers, railways, and runways. And of course, we're a logistics state. Everyone knows Memphis has a big port and a rail hub, one of 2 cities where all 5 Class A railroads come into that city. They know that interstates are important. They crisscross our state, indeed Nashville, where you have 3 major interstates that crisscross right there in the middle of that city. They know that Tennessee, so many businesses choose to locate there because we're within an 8-hour drive of a majority of the nation's population. So logistics require good roads and rivers and rail and runways. But you know what? They're not seeing it in this. When you, in the name of infrastructure, spend this amount of money. Now, I have great respect for my colleagues on each side of the aisle that have worked to produce a product, to do it in a bipartisan way. That is commendable. It's commendable. For Tennesseans, the result is something that is frustrating to them. You know, this is considered to be the world's greatest deliberative body. I always appreciated how our former colleague, Senator Alexander, would talk about the cup and saucer. The hot coffee gets poured into the cup, it spills over into the saucer, it cools off, you add some sweetener, and you get something that you enjoy. People expect more. They expect better of this deliberative body. And Tennesseans know that our nation's freedom has been well served by robust, respectful, bipartisan debate. That's a good thing. It strengthens freedom. It brings people together. It brings them to the table to talk about what is their priority. Now, unfortunately, most of us in this body have not had the opportunity to be at that table. And amendments that we have worked on that we felt like would have improved this bill are not going to be heard. Not here, not in a hearing, in a committee. We're just not going to see that as a part of this process. That is unfortunate. And it is going to be unfortunate if, indeed, that happens on the next bill, or the bill after that, or the bill after that. We should return to regular order and go through this process. Now, I had about 30 amendments that I had offered as improvements for this bill, and Mr. President, rest assured, I'm not going to stand here and go through each and every one of those amendments. But there are some things I thought needed our attention in this bill. As many of my colleagues know, broadband is something that, whether I was serving in the House or back in the state Senate in Tennessee, or before that, going in and reorganizing a Tennessee Film, Entertainment, and Music Commission for our governor, broadband and moving from analog to digital, making high-speed internet available all across our state, closing that digital divide. I've spent so many hours working on this, and I filed 3 amendments that I felt like would really do some damage control on these and help close the divide, getting to our rural and unserved areas, people that have no internet. Amendment 2327 would have prohibited the federal government from forcing municipal broadband provider programs into states that have outlawed them. Now, Tennessee is one of those states that says to municipalities, if you want to serve people within your city, that's great, you go ahead. But you can't go outside of your boundaries. And there are other states that have had this issue. And there's a reason they say if you serve your constituents, great, but don't go outside that. It's because states that have allowed these schemes ended up banning them for a reason. And usually it's because these government-run systems would end up imploding, leaving the taxpayers with the bill that they were going to have to pay. Now, another amendment, Amendment 2377, would have prohibited the FCC, our Federal Communications Commission, from implementing price-setting schemes on broadband providers. That, allowing the FCC to do that rate setting and price setting, would destroy investment in rural broadband. It would destroy it. We know this. And it would actually incentivize providers in avoiding these unserved areas. Sometimes we talk about that as being that last mile that needs to get that fiber, that last mile that needs fixed wireless, that last mile that is needing some form of connectivity. And Amendment 2328, and we do hope this one makes it in the bill, would strike language permitting regulators to allow these broadband grant recipients to use the money for, and I'm quoting the language in the bill, any use determined necessary to facilitate the goals of the program, end quote. Now, Mr. President, this sounds vague. It is vague. And if there's one thing that we learned prior, when we put a lot of money out during President Obama's time, is that sometimes this money ends up not being targeted to broadband, but ends up as a slush fund. We also have an amendment that would deal with a shovel-ready infrastructure project on our southern border. Amendment 2406 would redirect $1 billion from Amtrak. By the way, Amtrak's getting many billions of dollars in this bill. And it would send that money over to the Department of Homeland Security to finish the southern border wall construction. We all know what is happening on that border. Record numbers of illegal aliens coming in, many very sick, COVID positive. We know that they are ending up, as are drugs, as are gangs, in cities and towns across this nation. Indeed, until we secure this southern border, every town is a border town, every state is a border state. And God bless our law enforcement officers who are fighting this every day. I'm hearing from them, and I want them to know I hear them, and I understand the pressures that they are under. And we also know that our communities are struggling, trying to get back to work and really move forward with regrowing the economy. But inflation has gotten in the way. And one of the big problems is that people point to with the high cost of fuel and logistics and of packing materials is the killing of the Keystone Pipeline. So Amendment 2298 would amend Section 4034 of the bill, which calls for a study on job loss and impacts on consumer energy due to the revocation of the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline. My amendment says that if the report shows that killing the pipeline caused numerous job losses and an impact on consumer energy cost, that the president should revoke, he shall revoke his executive order and get out of the way of the pipeline construction. Get people back to work and get the prices at the pump, get them down. Get them down to where they were when President Trump left office. I mean, what's the purpose of a report if it doesn't have any teeth? So let's take an action on that. You know, Mr. President, there is no bill that is ever perfect. They all have to be worked on. Many times we come back a year or so later and we do technical corrections on a bill. We make changes. And this is no different. This bill needs time. It needs a thorough amendment process. It needs to go back to the committees of jurisdiction to work through these issues. Are the American people for infrastructure? Yes, they are for infrastructure. Tennesseans are for infrastructure. I'm for infrastructure projects. Yes, indeed. Am I for this piece of legislation? No, because it's a document that has misplaced priorities. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll, please.
Ms. Baldwin.
said the same thing I told ya. My eyes are clear, there's no secret. I wanna know, was it serious? I need it clear, my best friend. Isn't easy to show with the weight of the world on my shoulders. I know I told you. It's the best light I know. It's not a game that I am playing. My love, trying to hold my feeling. I don't know what's right. I'll find the best way. I think that I might. I know you made it in the nick of time. I'm calling on you. I think we're made of something. I think we're made of something. I keep my time in a pocket. I wanna find a new keeper. I like the way it's mysterious. I think I found my own way. Isn't easy to show with the weight of the world on my shoulders. I know I told you. It's the best light I know. It's not a game that I am playing. My love, trying to hold my feeling. I don't know what's right. I'll find the best way. I think that I might. I know you made it in the nick of time. I'm calling on you. I think we're made of something. I think we're made of something. Trying to hold my feeling, I don't know what's right. I'll find the best way, I think that I might. I know you made it in the nick of time. I'm calling on you. I think we're made of something. I think we're made of something.
Everyone get on Twitter and retweet every #Don'tKillCrypto tweet. We need to keep it trending so we can show the senators we mean business.
What up? Alright. Little sleepy day going on. I have my chart on a different screen. This is disorienting. Not any better. How am I gonna do this? I'm not sure. Actually, I got an idea. Boom! Alright. Now I just gotta move this up. There we are, back to the old school. Or I have a better idea. God, should have thought of this first. Let's do this. Switch them. The switch. Nice. That looks good. Alright, I put clothes on. It's gonna be a pantsless day, but for you guys, anything. What's up, the Thermo Queen? What's up, Megan? Thanks for subscribing, good to have you. Speaking of which, great to have everybody here. You know, this is something that unfortunately is really boring, but it's important. And it's how those things tend to be, right? So, happy to have you guys here with me. It would be a lot more boring without you. And, I don't know. We'll see what happens. People are saying that they already voted. Maybe that's true. As far as I know, they haven't. Because why would they still be then debating it? But I looked up some news sites. I don't see kind of a conclusion. Like, investing.com doesn't have a big article saying they did or didn't pass crypto provisions, etc. So I'm leaning towards they haven't voted yet. We watch a lot of the Fed announcements here live, and what you find is there's just a lot of downtime in between everything. Kind of maybe typical politicians. They talk for 5 minutes, they need 30 minutes of downtime. I don't know. Let's take a peek here. Actually, we're going to start real small. We're going to start on the 15. So, if you guys saw me doodling earlier, we're seeing a lot of similar price structures. We're seeing ascending highs, and we're seeing higher lows, but it is a broadening wedge. Happening today. All right, let me get into it. I'm like, not in the zone. What we're seeing here today, saw a little whiplashing, saw a higher high, followed by a lower low. So what we can pretty much take away from this is that we're going to see something along these lines. I think Ethereum's already doing this. Well, Diamond. People consider these a reversal pattern. I don't see them in crypto reversing very often. They actually tend to lead to continuation, at least in my observation. So from our high to our low, we're back to the 618, 43,784. You can see price has interacted with it twice already. Looking to break that. Move up to 44.1. Or the full retracement, 44,600. If we get it, let's see where Fibonacci would suggest we'd look next. 45.9. Alright. 46.8. It doesn't really line up with much. That's okay. Basically, we already know. We don't need Fibonacci right now. It's a mark of a great trader. Knowing when to use tools, not just how to use them. When to use them. So, here's where we've been looking. Since May. Same thing. Nothing changed. The only thing that changed is people now don't think it's crazy to be calling for these levels. Let's take a peek. Weekly doesn't have too much resistance. We see 43.8 from back in February. And then we have in April 45.2. No, that's higher. 49.1, right? Yeah, 49.1. That's right above. I wonder, as a throwback to Mr. Casper, Mr. Jason Casper, I wonder if his 165 or if his 6.65. I wonder if that's really close to there. So let me see here. What if I do it this way? Will this work? Ooh, it's gonna work. Oh, would you? Would you look at that? Woo! All right, Mr. Casper. Maybe you're onto something here. 618 retrace. 0.65 retrace. Right there at 49. We were looking for 48. 49's close enough. All those numbers are really similar. The only factors that have really changed since we started looking is that 20 weekly. Here we are at the gates. The gates. Wasn't worried at 30. Wasn't threatening. Now we are in potentially threatening price territory. We can see this week, aka today, we've traded above the 20. Now we're back below. Not ideal. Not what we want to see, really. Not at all, actually. But all hope is not lost, and we are going to, right now, show you what you should be looking for. Alright. So here we are. Pull this up. There it is. Bam. On our daily calculation, sitting a little higher than weekly, we've also traded above and are now trading below. So if we look at both the daily and the weekly, I think we're looking just about 44. 44. So that's what's changed. When we originally fell, you can see that 20 weekly hung out, just chilled in that box, right near the 618, the 65, retracement from 65 down to 30. Everything was pointing there. I really never doubted it. Here is where I don't have the same confidence. I don't know what's going to happen here. All of this, I can't say I knew. That's just not honest. No one knows anything. Or they're stupid enough to think they do. But I had full confidence we were going to the 20 weekly. It's happened every single time. Every single time we've entered a bear market, we have broken the 20, backtested the 20, rejected, gone to lower lows. So basically what we're looking for here, well, step one, don't break the low. What's up, Rick Flair 19? Over on Twitch. Subscribe. Thank you. Good to have you. Step one, don't break 28.8. I think probably no one, no matter how novice you are, probably no one needed to hear that, right? That's okay. We're going to get a little better. So watch this trend line right here. See this. This is important. We have a very solid pattern here. Actually, I drew that wrong already. Make it easier. There we go. Very important pattern here. One that we've been watching on this channel. You guys know, I'm not a huge fan of it, but a spade's a spade. This is Wyckoff accumulation. Doesn't guarantee that it will play out or continue. This could fail. All patterns can fail. They're not invincible. There we are. This one's nice and easy. No. Open image in new tab. There we go. So, here we go. Oh, to go like this. The screen's all off. It's throwing me off. Let's go that. There we are. We can see. We are now, after low, low, low. The wicks on our candles here would kind of actually describe it the other way, but if we look at the body, candle closes, it fits perfectly. This is something we've looked at for a while. This is not just something we're bringing up now. In previous streams, we have this weak bounce, rejection, and now we have what could be consolidation at resistance. Let's go back to the chart. Where'd you go? Oh man, I did not plan this. Too many tabs up. As always, there we go. So this fits so well. So well. Actually, you know what I'll do? Because they're being really boring right now. Let's pull this up. I'll just throw this over here. Yeah. There we go. That'll work. So this way you guys can look at it while I do this. I think that'll make sense. So let's clean this up. I don't want too much on this chart because this is going to be a concept that, while it is simple, a lot of people are going to kind of be stumped. So I want it to be as simple as we can. Let's take the wicks off. Now, this is cherry picking. I admitted it the first time I did it, but I don't care. Because it fits so well, I just don't care. So we take a look at this pattern. We already had this marked previously. This would be, I would consider this the point above AR. I can't remember the term for it. Point above AR. Essentially, this is the resistance, right? If we look over there, I guess it's in the top of the screen. That's an important point. When in relation to two other pieces, a spring right here. And then what is SOS? I totally forgot all the terms now. I did a whole episode on them. I had them memorized and I forgot them. The SOS essentially, though, is consolidating, accumulating, whatever you want to call it, at resistance. That is why this point's important. Here we are. This could play out many ways. It could play like this. That would fit very well. If this plays out, we'd expect to move to the upside. Where? Well, probably to that 48-ish level above us for the retrace. Let's put these other points out. We have double bottom here. That is a great sign for the spring. Great piece of evidence for the spring. And we have what I will consider here. Yeah, good enough. I'll take this. This can be the SC. This can be the ST, right? Doesn't really matter. What's important, though, is everyone got caught short right here. It doesn't have the typical back test of support that we do look for on the Wyckoff schematic, but screw schematics. It's not about schematics. It's about market sentiment. It's about actors, and it's about people making decisions. The whole market before July 21st, right here, when this was the chart we had. Go away, candle. Everyone was bearish, rightfully so. I mean, I wasn't, because I'm crazy. But rightfully so. The chart looked awful. There was no reason, in a technical sense, to be bullish. So the market was very much caught short. July 21st, spring. That's what makes this spring. It is a large move in the opposite direction, a reversal. But it's catching participants off guard and catching them in the wrong position. The place or the price in which we've rallied to is really, really important. Above resistance. If it was below resistance, this, even without the wicks, we wouldn't call this Wyckoff. So what would we look for here now? Like 4 hour. There we go. Well, we could say maybe we're going to see consolidation. Maybe we'll see 40,500 tested. Then we'll see lower highs, maybe higher lows. This would be ideal to see a very smooth trend. Descending highs, ascending lows would be perfect. They're still not doing anything, by the way. This fits. It fits. This pattern doesn't like I said, it doesn't change what's happening. It doesn't have to consolidate like this, but if it does, it paints a perfect Wyckoff. You essentially have a series of lows. The last low being the spring before the takeoff, then consolidation. Hard to argue it. Hard to argue against it. It really is. If only that mattered, though. So here's something that I actually I'm gonna shout out to Crypto Jack here, because if he hadn't tweeted about something along these lines, I wouldn't have noticed it. Uno segundo. There we are. What pattern do we have here? A very strange one. Very strange one. This is how I would likely draw it. Something along these lines. Like that. What we have is a broadening wedge. We tested the top of that wedge for the third time here. Right into August. Sold off for a higher low. Now we're above the wedge. So what we're looking for that lines up with what we're talking about is a pullback to the high trend here. This creates a very bullish pattern if it holds. If it doesn't hold, we go back down. We pray that our low of August 5th holds. If it doesn't, we're kind of back to where we started, or I'll even make the argument we're worse off than we started. Oops. As we're about to go full circle here, why does that not line up right? Oh, because I'm on the 4-hour. Derp. Okay. I would argue we're worse off if we do break 37 now. We were looking for a 35. It looks like 37.3 was what we got. If we set a lower low, it doesn't doom us, but this is going to be a big signal. Our immediate validation, I guess, of this pattern being bonk is breaking back below the wedge. This one I would say is the least sure, the least confident. The least confident. You could dance back down underneath. Crypto loves doing that. Coming back up. But I would like to see 42.2 hold. This is where I'm going to start wondering if we really are going to break through it. One thing of note that's positive is we didn't see a huge wick today. That's something I was afraid of, is maybe we wicked up to 48 and then closed below the 20, and then that's just bear season. So losing 42.2, not the end of the world, but if we lose 37, if we lose August 5th's low, this looks really bad. You do have support below, but you are so threatened, or price is so threatened. Let's see where that is. Here, 35. Price will be so threatened around there, and there is a lot of support here potentially. But the farther down you go, the closer you get to these lows, the uglier this is going to be. We're finally here at the 20 weekly. It took 2.5 months. The 20 daily just above us. It would be very odd to me not to see that tested, no matter what. We're already so close to it. So I would say this weekend is probably the right time frame. Today is possible. I don't like saying today. This is where it gets scary. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if anyone knows what's going to happen. So best bet, best hope, let's stay above 42.2. Break that, then we're going to have to look lower. Pray. We're going to have to pray. I don't know if they're ever going to come back. These people, they talk for 10 minutes and then they take 3-hour breaks. But so far, we're looking good. We're in a very different position than the 20th of July. Not even a month later. Only 17 days later, we're in a very different position. Now we're above resistance. These resistances that people seem to think we're never going to break. Now we're back above them. Now we're dancing with the 20. I want to see that. I want to see us close above it. I want to see a back test. I want to see this. Yeah, I'll take that. Something like this. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to play out that way. Nobody does. I certainly don't. That's what I'd like to see. Luckily, we do have some decent signs now we didn't have before. As of yesterday's close, so after our stream. Daily money flow positive as predicted. VWAP still trending up. Money flow still trending up. Momentum still trending up. So we don't have, on the daily at least, a sign of this being done. Daily is not saying this is over yet. What's happening here? There we go. Click down to the 12. 12 also positive on, what was it? On yesterday's close as well. Interesting that the 12 and the daily both flip positive on money flow at the same time. Not a super common occurrence. Momentum still up on the 12. 6 hours where it gets a little sketchier. This looked so beautiful back here. So much strength. Then we set a lower low, and now it's lost some of that momentum. What we're really going to want to see is this not happen. We don't want this to happen. We don't want the momentum to roll back over. And if it does, and honestly VWAP is suggesting it will, if it does, we really, really don't want to see a lower low on momentum, and nor do we want to see a lower low on money flow. If money flow doesn't really dip, then it could be okay. That would probably catch before it flips over or rolls over. But man, I've been nervous for this price point for 2 months. Because I knew it was coming. And I knew when we got here, this would be when the real threats are in play. That said, the chart looks way better than I would have assumed for where we are. I was thinking we were going to see a really sketchy test of it. Super straight rally, though this is pretty just up, right? I was thinking maybe in like 5 candles, we were just going to go like this, and then we're going to sell back off and go down. That was a possibility in my head. But now that we're here, we're back on top of all of this range. All of these previous resistances now looking to potentially be support. We're above them. We're out from underneath their weight. And we're on top of our highest trend. A back test to that trend would be fine. Would be great. That would be strength, actually, to find a low here and test the 20 again. Then the odds, I would say, are on the upside. It's really going to come down to, does the rally get stopped out here? Which is interesting, because you have one more day this weekend. I don't ever want someone to trade based on, like, it's a weekend. It goes up, it goes down. That's stupid. However, we have seen these weekends kind of trend in one direction. If a weekend opens to a dump, typically it dumps through the weekend, at least in the last memories, right? That might be an interesting thing to look at. When was the last weekend? Friday the 30th. Let's see what happened. Friday, Saturday. So Saturday, Sunday, there we go. Weekend dump. Reversed August 2nd. So at the 23rd? 23rd. Green. Kept going green. One more. 16th. Ooh, here's a fake out. Maybe that's why people got extra bearish. I don't know. Or no, the 17th. So 17th and 18th, same color. That's funny. They are. So that fits the pattern. Saturday and Sunday, right here. Same colors. Saturday and Sunday, red, red. Saturday and Sunday, green, green. Saturday and Sunday, green, green. This is actually pretty cool. Let's go back to the 10th. Womp. There we go. Never mind. But still, 3 out of 4 of the examples as we go back. Pretty predictable. I would bet Sunday that we see a green candle. But closing into Monday could be dangerous. 200's at 44.8. We've tested 44.6. That's close, but that's not actually to the 200. I again cannot imagine that not happening. Can't imagine that. It's like a total. Total has some good stuff for us. Let's see if total has the same pattern, actually. I don't think I've applied that trend line to total. Total, we looked at yesterday, is actually more bullish than Bitcoin, which might not be good for Bitcoin dominance. Might see that actually go down when I'd expect it to go up when we break this range. 618 sitting above us, still reaching up for it. Looks like it's currently battling with weekly resistance here. From these lows, whoa, dropping stuff. Here we go. But the 20 is above the weekly, so this is interesting because we're going to get to look at two charts to get an answer. If we see a rejection on Bitcoin from the 20 this weekend, but we don't on total, still pretty good. Vice versa. If we see total reject, we don't see Bitcoin, still probably pretty good. If they both reject from the 20, it'll be ugly. It'll be ugly. Again, I don't think we can call it a rejection until we have some kind of low, to break some low looking left. But it's interesting. We're going to have both charts to look at. It's unusual. So this doesn't have the same pattern. It doesn't, because this is descending. Huh. Fancy that. I kind of expected these to have the same pattern. Kind of expected it to have that high trend as well. Let's see these. Oh, that's pretty cool. Check this out. This is why you always keep your old TA. Never get rid of it. Get rid of your old TA. Look at this. This line drawn back in December. Look where we touched. That's pretty cool. I like that. Right there. Is it? Wow. It's like perfect too. Awesome. Awesome. I'm ready for this weekend to be over. I want to know. I want to know if we're going to go through the 20 or not. Oh, God. On the upside, ADA hit our target. Sweet. Ethereum also hit our target. 30,000. Or 3,000. 30,000. Not this year. Maybe. 3,000 Bitcoin did not reach where we were looking yet. It got close to 45, but I'm just going to say it didn't. Raven did it while we were live. XRP, there we go. That's a new one. Hit our target today at 79 cents. Nice. Oop, are they back? Let's switch them. They're back, maybe. Or no, just someone coughed in. Someone just coughed in the camera. Son of a bee.
Mr. President.
Yep.
The senator from Utah,
I ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call.
without objection.
Mr. President, we're debating a bill that a number of us have spoken on a number of occasions. Since my last address on the Senate floor on this topic, we've received a score regarding the bill from the Congressional Budget Office. Now, remember, it's the CBO's score it's the CBO's role to put together a score on legislation we're considering. It's part of how the system works in Washington so that we can assess what will and will not add to the deficit and how it will do so if it does. It's an important part of the process. When we finally received the CBO score just about 48 hours ago, we discovered a few things. We discovered that despite the representations that we've heard by the bill's staunchest advocates to the effect that the bill would be paid for, that is, that it would not add to the debt and deficit, and that it would not add to the debt and deficit in a way that also didn't involve raising taxes. As it turned out, the CBO rejected the claim that this bill was paid for. In fact, the CBO concluded that 256 of the $550 billion in claimed pay-fors didn't pay. They're not pay-fors. and thus that they will considerably, I mean, we're talking here about over $250 billion that would go right on to the debt and deficit. They also concluded that in the long run, over the next 10 years, we'll be looking at an additional $340 billion in cost to the federal government, a cost that by some estimates could reach as high as $400 billion because of the spillover effect that this bill is likely to have on future spending, contracting authority and otherwise. So this bill is not paid for. The pay-fors suggested by the bill's proponents don't get the job done. In fact, more than half of them simply don't get there. We do, however, see that there are some of the pay-fors that create significant policy concerns. So one of the pay-fors that isn't fake is an extension of the so-called G fees. G fees being imposed by entities like Fannie Mae that will inevitably increase the cost that home buyers will face when they go to buy a home. Now, why does that matter here? Well, we've seen a startling uptick in inflation across the board, everything from gas to groceries, everything from health care to housing. We see that increasing stunningly in a way that a lot of people are pointing out correctly, that first-time home buyers are now finding it very difficult to get into a home. This is something that's going to end up affecting all poor and middle-class Americans at a time when they can little afford it. And yet we're increasing these fees that are, in effect, a backdoor invisible tax on a lot of those who are at least in a position to pay it. Some of the other non-fake pay-fors that actually do bring something in include an increase in the fees paid by manufacturers and distributors of certain chemicals. The issue there is that this fee, well, labeled as not a tax because technically speaking it's not a tax, will end up increasing the price of basically every consumer good purchased by the American people. The way these things end up working is that, to the tune of about $15 billion or so, Americans will find that pretty much everything they buy, from apparel to electronics, will get a little more expensive. They may not see it. In fact, the overwhelming majority of them won't even know to attribute it to this particular piece of legislation. But it will have that effect. It will make all Americans a little poorer. It'll make all Americans face a very stark reality in which their already strapped dollars that they earn will go just a little bit less far. We have to remember that from one year to the next, we don't see dramatic fluctuations in the quantity of goods that the American people have access to, that they may buy. In other words, the U.S. economy is capable of producing a relatively foreseeable, predictable, somewhat finite supply of goods in a particular year. When that doesn't change dramatically from one year to the next, as it almost never does, but you dramatically increase the money supply in the U.S. economy, then what you see is that everything gets a little bit more expensive. This ends up hurting, in particular, America's poor and middle class. It ends up hurting, in particular, those Americans, including most Americans, who in one way or another live paycheck to paycheck, who in one way or another depend on the income that they have, and the income that they have is relatively fixed. So as a result of that, they don't get as far. Now, you've got some Americans, including the wealthiest and well-connected in our society, who may well figure out ways to get wealthy off of this bill. One way or another, they can play things to their advantage, and they may make a lot of money off of it. You've got another category of very wealthy Americans, maybe, people in the top 1 or 2% of income earners, who might notice that the things they buy are getting more expensive, but it might not affect them all that much. But then you've got everyone else, and I mean the vast, overwhelming majority of all Americans, who, in one way or another, plan out each year knowing that they've got a relatively finite amount of money to spend. And that money goes less far when we just print money to the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars. Remember, the federal government in recent years has been spending about $4 trillion a year. Tragically, even at the top of our economic cycle, with record low unemployment and with record high growth, we were still spending $1 trillion a year more than we were bringing in. Bringing in about 3, spending about 4. This was inexcusable then. It would be inexcusable now, except that we're making it much, much worse. Last year, we took in about $3 trillion and we spent $3.6 trillion. Borrowing and then printing close to $4 trillion additional dollars. What does this do? Well, it makes all Americans just a little bit poorer, especially those living on a relatively fixed income. And so this is troubling when we do that. We ought to be concerned when we do that. Inflation numbers that are coming out all the time, including some that I've heard about the first time today, indicate that everything's getting more expensive. And what are we doing? Well, we're on track to spend another $1.2 trillion, including $550 billion of new spending, which the bill's proponents claim is paid for when most of it isn't paid for. And that portion of it that is paid for is, in one way or another, often paid for in a way that will inure to the detriment of poor middle-class Americans. This is concerning. It's also concerning that one of the other pay-for provisions, the one focused on cryptocurrency, focuses on an industry that's rapidly developing within the United States.
Here we go, pay
depends
attention.
on a lot of innovation happening in the United States. One of these pay-for provisions seeks to bring in more revenue to the federal government, or at least to promise more revenue to the federal government, with the promise of requiring those who buy and sell cryptocurrency to treat it the same way as they would the exchange of securities. Mr. President, this is very different than securities. These aren't just stocks. It's something very different. It's a medium of exchange that, if adopted more widely, could facilitate a lot of economic activity and a lot of innovation within the United States of America. If, in fact, we pass this bill, mark my words, it's going to have a chilling effect on innovation within this sector. And what you'll see is the flight of innovation and investment related to innovation to offshore locations around the globe. Places outside the United States may well be the ones to reap the benefit associated with the loss here in the United States if we adopt an unproven, untested, unknown strategy for dealing with something, trying to adopt many decades-old regulatory policies to a completely new form of exchange. One that, by the way, values very highly the privacy of those who exchange in it. And so if what you're going to do is take away that value by requiring that all of it be registered and publicly disclosed, and by giving the federal government the ability to peer into it, you're going to stifle innovation. You're going to make a lot of people upset, and you're going to make Americans poorer. At the heart of a lot of this is a concern that the federal government, as it takes more and more money, as it prints more and more money, as it requires Americans to work weeks or months out of every year just to pay their federal taxes, only to be told that it's not nearly enough and hasn't been enough for many decades, because we're nearly $30 trillion in debt. But it's still not enough, because we're still going to borrow and print more. It's insulting to them, and it's especially insulting to them when you tell them that in connection with the same legislation that also includes other intrusions into their privacy. For example, there's a pilot program called for in this legislation that would be created by this legislation that would be designed specifically to monitor how many miles someone drives in a year. Now, this has long been a fantasy of a number of people who would like to see the federal government tracking miles driven by every motorist in America. Now, Mr. President, we all know that there's almost no way to achieve this that wouldn't excessively interfere with the privacy rights of every man, woman, and child in America. Look, the American people are fine with a government that makes sure that we're safe from foreign aggressors, that regulates interstate and foreign commerce, that coins money and regulates the value thereof, that adopts a uniform set of bankruptcy laws, immigration laws, protects trademarks, copyrights, and patents. What they do not want is a nanny. What they do not want is a snooping device added to every car that will track them, that will track where they and their families are going. It's none of their darn business. Keep the federal government out of this. Look, whether you want more government spending or not, chances are, if you're listening to this, you probably are concerned, regardless of what political hat you wear, regardless of who you voted for in recent presidential or congressional elections. You probably don't want the federal government in your car, monitoring your every move, going where you're going. We know that when governments do that, when they start to assume that everything is government's business, bad things happen. It ends in tears and wars. That's none of the federal government's darn business. We don't want the federal government even developing technology to start snooping on every person's every move. Which brings me to yet another intrusion on personal privacy and liberty in this legislation, Section 24220. Calls for the development and within just a few years, the formalization and finalization of regulations that would require passenger vehicles manufactured and sold within the United States to have a device that would passively measure the blood alcohol content of the driver and do so in a way that would inhibit or at least impair the ability of the vehicle to operate if the vehicle, in its infinite wisdom, was able to ascertain that the blood alcohol content of the driver was over 0.8. Now, look, we're stopping drunk driving. It's terrible. It results in countless lives lost. But, Mr. President, we can all see a lot of things that can go wrong with that. Setting aside for a minute the constitutional implications of the intrusiveness of putting technology in every passenger vehicle that requires at the outset, without any finding that anyone has done anything wrong, that requires you to take a test mandated by the federal government every time you want to do something as simple as turn on your car. Then let's consider what happens when, with such a technology, which to my knowledge doesn't yet exist, with such a technology, assuming it's able to come into existence because of these burdensome regulations in a few years, that technology, if they're able to develop it, is going to be costly. Who does that hurt? Well, you guessed it, poor and middle-class America, who will all of a sudden find that every passenger vehicle will become a lot more expensive. It's just the way it works. When we mandate the creation of new federal regulations, and those federal regulations apply to any new automobile sold in the United States, the price of new automobiles goes up. And in the case of a particularly novel, particularly sophisticated technology like this one, I suspect it'll go up a lot. This may not be troubling to the millionaires and billionaires out there who don't feel the pinch of that, but to everyone else, the 99% of all Americans, more than that, I suppose, this hurts. Moreover, what happens when that technology malfunctions? Not if, but when. Look, we've all had cars that will malfunction for one reason or another. And oftentimes it's basic security devices, something as simple as that annoying beeper that goes off until you put your seatbelt on. Sometimes, some people will put their seatbelt on and it still pings. That's a terribly annoying nuisance when that happens. The consequences are much more deeply felt. They're much more severe if someone gets in the car, whether it's to go to work, to come home from work, to take a loved one to the doctor or the hospital, and it doesn't work. Look, glitches happen. And if you're talking about adding an override to a vehicle, maybe that override to the vehicle mistakenly thinks that it smells alcohol. Maybe it doesn't like the aftershave or cologne you're wearing on that particular day. Maybe the whole thing stops working and your car stops working with it. This isn't one of those things where you can just open up the hood and find the presence of an on-off switch, as Jerry Seinfeld might have put it many years ago. No, this is much more sophisticated technology that the average, hardworking American isn't going to be able to fix quickly. They won't even be able to see it. There again, they're going to face more costs as they take their vehicle into the shop to have it evaluated by a certified technician capable of dealing with that brand new, very sophisticated, very expensive technology. So with each of these things, Mr. President, we see something of a common theme. The federal government, which already plays too prominent a role in too many people's lives, which is already taxing us too much, spying on us too much, and considering everything under the sun its business. We're making even more things its business, from cryptocurrency to where and how far you drive your car to whether you can operate your car at all. We're doing all of this so that we can spend even more federal money on even more federal infrastructure projects, which are even more expensive by virtue of the fact that we're dealing with federal dollars. For the simple reason that compliance with all the federal regulations that accompany the expenditure of federal infrastructure dollars costs a lot of money. In many states like mine, it can cost 20, 30%, sometimes even more, on top of what it would cost if these were just state revenues that they were spending. Well, I'd ask the question, is it worth it? I'd ask the question, do we want Big Brother knowing our every move? I'd ask the question, do we want a government that's already requiring you to work weeks or months out of every year just to pay your federal taxes? Do you want it printing even more money, making sure that the dollars that you spend, which are finite, limited, and sacred, will go even less far? I think not, and I urge my colleagues who support this legislation to reconsider.
When the downtown lights start.
Should have kept you where you belong. No matter how many gods fall, there will always be another to stand against you. They will fall as well. Death of Olympus means the death of us all. Then prepare for your death, Poseidon.
President,
Senior Senator from Illinois is
for
ready.
the information of members, we are planning to have a vote at 5 o'clock today on the confirmation of Eunice Lee to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Wanted members to make their plans accordingly. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senior Senator from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and then I will be asking unanimous consent to consider legislation. We included the Restaurant Revitalization Fund in our March legislation on COVID relief. We did that because of all of the industries affected by COVID-19. Restaurants have been some of the most difficult businesses to survive COVID-19. They were ordered by government basically to shut down at the beginning of COVID-19. Then, as we started to make progress, they were at much restricted operations. And into this day, restaurants are still not up to their full capacity. Their revenues have been very much decimated as a result of COVID-19. We came together in March with bipartisan legislation in order to do something about that. And we included that in our legislation, $28.6 billion of relief for restaurants. Now, what it did is cover some of their revenue loss as a result of COVID-19. It gave them a lifeline to be able to survive this pandemic. And we projected that $28.6 billion would be the need, but we were wrong. We were wrong because COVID-19 was more severe than we thought. Restaurants were more badly damaged than we had anticipated, and there was a great deal of more demand and need than the $28.6 billion. We are now being told by the Small Business Administration that the right number was $71.3 billion, or an additional $42.7 billion that is needed. I've introduced bipartisan legislation to provide this additional authority to the SBA to complete this program. It's bipartisan. My partner in this is Senator Wicker. We're joined by Senator Schumer, Senator Murkowski, Senator Cantwell, Senator Ernst, Senator Sinema, Senator Cassidy, Senator Stabenow, and Senator Hyde-Smith. And I might add, there are many, many more senators on both sides of the aisle that very much support our efforts to live up to our commitment. Now, why do we need to take this up right now? This is a matter of life or death for many restaurants in our community. There's also a matter of fairness. We have two restaurants side by side in the exact same circumstances, submitting their applications on the same day, having the exact same need. Both were advised that they would get funding. One got funding before the $28.6 billion was exhausted. The other that was told that they were going to get funding, they won't get funding unless we act. That's not right. There's a matter of the credibility of the United States Senate and of Congress and of government. We say we're going to do something, we should live up to our commitments. The urgency of getting this done is now. I don't think there's a senator in this chamber who hasn't heard from restaurants in their state about how badly they need these funds and how they thought these funds were going to be in their bank and they're no longer in this bank. I've heard from so many senators directly about this. The urgency is now. And let me just anticipate one other argument that I might hear. And that is, well, where are we getting this money from? Well, Mr. President, legislation before us takes $36 billion out of the small business programs. $36 billion. So this is paid for by the rescissions that have been made in this legislation that we are considering that's before us today. So for all those reasons, this is a fiscally responsible thing to do. And then lastly, let me say, before I yield the floor to the majority leader, let me say that we made a commitment to help our small businesses. We did that, Democrats and Republicans working together. In some cases, we overestimated the dollars that we need. In some cases, we underestimated the dollars that we need. But we always came back and provided the full funding for the programs we've authorized. And in total, it's not much different than has previously been authorized. This is a matter of fairness and a matter of absolute need that we provide the extra money now for the restaurants. And before I make my unanimous consent request, I would yield the floor so the majority leader can get the floor.
Well, I thank
Majority Leader is recognized.
I thank my good friend from Maryland for offering this UC and strongly and fervently support it. I've been proud to join Senators Cardin and Sinema in leading the fight to provide direct relief to this industry. We all know restaurants were particularly hard hit during COVID. And the idea that they have all recovered is just so far from the truth. You know, any business where people had to gather were hit hard, hit the hardest. Restaurants at the very top of the list. And they're a lifeblood to our cities and our communities. They, of course, are a place where people get food, but they get community, they join together, they feel roots, whether it's a small town or a large city. Restaurants in neighborhood after neighborhood, community after community, are often the glue that makes communities tick. And they were hurt. The funds that we provided a lifeline to 100,000 applicants across the country. In my state of New York, $3.6 billion went to 9,775 restaurants. But the job wasn't done. They ran out of money long before restaurants were helped. And anyone who thinks our restaurants are out of trouble, I just ate at one last night, a Polish couple, Greenpoint, lovely little restaurant. Are you hurting? Yes, we might go under. And this story could be repeated in restaurant after restaurant after restaurant. In New York, 27,000 restaurants are waiting in desperation. These are hardworking people, very hardworking people. They struggle. They put their all, their whole heart and soul into the business and provide, as I said, often the glue for our communities. This legislation is fair, it is smart, it is right. We will get economic payback over and over and over again from keeping these restaurants going because they employ so many people, contract with so many independent suppliers and others. It just makes such sense. It's almost cruel to tell these restaurants, you're on your own now, when through no fault of their own they suffered through with COVID. So I strongly support this proposal by Senator Cardin. We're going to keep at it and keep at it and keep at it because our restaurants so desperately need the help. It was bipartisan in the past. Let's keep it bipartisan, but let's get the job done. Our restaurants need help, and our communities, our cities, our rural towns, our suburbs will be so rewarded when these restaurants are allowed to continue to stay open and to flourish. I thank the Senator for his leadership.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me thank Senator Schumer for his comments. Agree completely with everything you said. I'll just make one additional point before I make my unanimous consent request. What I'm asking for now has been what we have been following in regards to small business relief. Let me remind our colleagues that we work together, Democrats and Republicans, to craft the programs that help small business and save so many small businesses in our community. We misprojected the cost of the Paycheck Protection Program, not by $30 or $40 billion, by over $300 billion when we set it up. And we came back, Democrats and Republicans, lived up to our commitment and made the funds available that all small businesses could get fair treatment and equitable treatment under the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm asking my colleagues to do the exact same thing we did for the Paycheck Protection Program for the Restaurant Revitalization Program. And as already pointed out, there's been funds taken away from the small business programs under the bill we're considering on the floor today to almost the same amount that we're asking in supplemental funds. And with that, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S. 2675, introduced earlier today, that the bill be considered read 3 times and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Junior Senator from Kentucky is recognized.
the Treasury has been so thoroughly looted that we are incurring debt at a record-setting and alarming pace. Never in the history of our country have we incurred so much debt so fast. Our national debt now exceeds $28 trillion. It is now at 128% of our GDP. And we are asked by the Democrat Party to add $48 billion without so much as a, could we have a debate in committee, so much as even a word spoken over this. We're just going to add $48 billion with no discussion. It's a huge mistake. Now, it has been alleged that, well, the thing is that the restaurants are suffering because of COVID. No, they're suffering because Democrat governors locked them down. This is a man-made phenomenon. The economic disaster that we are in, that restaurants are in, is completely and entirely caused by Democrat governors. In my state, they're suing the Democrat governor because he won't let them open up. This is a man-made phenomenon. So if you reward a man-made phenomenon, you'll get more of it. You reward Democrat governors who've shut these restaurants down, guess what? They'll shut them down longer. The longer you give money to Democrat governors for their lockdown policies, the more lockdowns you'll get. We need to open up the country. We need to learn to live with this disease. As tragic as it has been, we need to learn to live with it, but the lockdowns have not worked. Closing the restaurants did not work, did not change the trajectory of this virus one iota. The only thing that is changing the trajectory of this virus now is the vaccine plus natural immunity. Closing restaurants did nothing and is doing nothing except for devastating the bottom line of restaurants. So with that, Mr. President, I would object to the unanimous consent.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
I regret the position of my colleague from Kentucky. I just really want to point out we have had hearings in our committee, Small Business Committee, in which the Restaurant Revitalization Act was very much brought up during the hearing. We've been receiving timely information about this program and how it's been implemented and the need for additional funds. So our committee has had ample opportunity to question how the program is being administered and the need for additional funds. I also regret that my colleague is holding the restaurants pretty much hostage and saying it's all right for us to give money to some but not others, when the administration of this was compromised because of a court case, and certain restaurants are now desperate as a result of not having adequate funds. I'm encouraged by the comments of the Majority Leader, Senator Schumer, that we will continue to focus on this issue. I can tell you it's urgent. We really need to deal with this immediately, and we'll be looking for every available opportunity to treat our restaurants equitably and fairly and provide the money that's needed to implement the restaurant revitalization program. I regret that we're not able to act today because of the senator's objection. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Assistant Majority Leader is recognized.
I'd just like to add a word and thank the Senator from Maryland for his leadership and Senator from New York for supporting this. And to reflect for a moment on the comments of the objector, the Senator from Kentucky. His exact words were, we've got to learn to live with this. Unfortunately, people are not living with this. They're getting infected and dying. And to accept the status quo and to somehow make it a partisan issue, that it's the Democratic governors that are responsible for what's going on here, is a sad oversimplification. In fact, it's tragic. We know what's happening. We have a new variant of this COVID-19 virus that has emerged because it is still on the loose, and it is changing by the day. We think the Delta variant is dangerous, maybe dramatically more contagious than the original virus. We know that even people who've been vaccinated can unknowingly transmit this disease, the new Delta variant, and we know that it's taken a deadly toll on 90% of the patients who were not vaccinated and were subjected to the illness that came about. I just want to say in general, I couldn't agree more with Senator Schumer and Senator Cardin that restaurants in our cities are really the lifeblood. Whether it's my hometown of Springfield, Illinois, or Chicago, which I'm honored to represent, I will tell you, these restaurants are still struggling. And as they struggle, our city struggles. And people that I know really measure where we are as an American nation recovering by the vibrancy of these restaurant businesses, the ones that are our favorites and bring us together. They've done their part. We should do our part to give them a helping hand. Let's get through this pandemic together. We certainly are not going to do it by saying that we have to accept the Delta variant and whatever else follows is just the natural course of things. We have it within our power to change that. More vaccinations and more careful use of masks and social distancing will make a difference, can make a real difference in this country. Until we come to grips with that reality, we're going to continue to face these devastating disappointments. Again, thanks to the Senator from Maryland for bringing this before us. I hope he'll continue to offer it. I yield the floor.
A true warrior
would suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Looking for a way out. Just want to squeeze all the pain out. Leeches under my skin break out. Suddenly I hear the sounds climbing up from underground. Finding myself out of the looking for a way out. Just want to squeeze all this pain out. Leeches under my skin break out. Finding myself. Finding myself out of the hole.
President,
Majority Leader is
I
recognized.
ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed
Without
with.
objection, so ordered.
Now, in a minute, I'm going to ask to vote on confirmation for Eunice Lee to be a United States Circuit Judge on the Second Circuit. She's an amazing person. I interviewed her and recommended her to the President. She'll be the only public defender on the Second Circuit. We've had very, very few public defenders on that circuit, and largely on our federal bench. They tend to be prosecutors, partners in big law firms. We're changing all that and getting people who have different walks of life, like public defenders, like people from the ACLU, like people from different organizations, so we have a new perspective on the bench. And she's a phenomenal person. I'm so proud that she will now get on the bench. So I ask that the Senate now vote on confirmation of the Lee nomination to be United States Circuit Judge.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Eunice C. Lee of New York to be United States Circuit Judge for the Second Circuit.
The question is on the nomination.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Braun, Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Mrs. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mrs. Feinstein, Mrs. Fisher, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, I gotta say something funny. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Arono. Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Ball, Mr. Peters, Mr. Portman, Mr. Reed, Mr. Risch, Mr. Romney, Ms. Rosen,
YouTube famous BTC King of Kings, protector of the crypto realm, first of his name, BIIG Daddy Crown has all the control.
Mr. Rounds,
Rico is homeless and eats beanie and weenies.
Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Sinema, Ms. Smith, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warnock. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Blumenthal, Booker, Brown, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Durbin, Feinstein, Hassan, Heinrich, Kane, King, Klobuchar, Leahy, Merkley, Ossoff, Padilla, Peters, Rosen, Schatz, Schumer, Van Hollen, Whitehouse. Senators voting in the negative: Burr, Capito, Cassidy, Collins, Cornyn, Cotton, Kramer, Crapo, Fisher, Hawley, Hyde-Smith, Kennedy, Lee, Lummis, Marshall, McConnell, Murkowski, Paul, Portman, Risch, Romney, Scott of South Carolina, Thune, Wicker.
Will the real Mr. Nakamoto please stand up? I guess they're finally voting. Probably another 80, 70 hours, something like that. Bitcoin, Ethereum looking solid. They don't look too upset about what's going on here. I dig it. I dig it. Oh, come on. These people will vote slow as they...
Mrs.
I don't know.
Shaheen, Mrs. Shaheen, aye.
I can't see my monitor. Let's switch them again.
Mr. Reed, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye.
Ooh. Going up. Going up. Going up. Market looks bullish on whatever they're about to say. Market looks bullish. Since we started the stream, it actually has changed. Money flow all of a sudden positive on almost every time frame.
Mr. Shelby, no.
Mr. Shelby? Well, the real Mr. Nakamoto.
Mrs. Murray,
Please
Mrs.
stand
Murray,
up.
aye.
Mrs. Murray. Oh my gosh. Oh, you can't see Ethereum, can you? That's not good either. We'll switch it back.
Mr. Grassley.
My
No.
ADD is kicking in.
Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, no.
Mr. Moran, no. Oh, I know it. Baby, I know it. Show C. Lummis on Twitter some love, yeah? Yeah. Same with Toomey. Same with what? Was it Warner? I can't remember the last one. Wyden,
Mr.
Toomey,
Bozeman, Mr.
Loomis.
Bozeman, no.
They all deserve love.
Mr. Inhofe, no.
If only there was a better way to record stuff in a way where it couldn't be tampered with under a system that has no central point of authority. If only.
Miss Warren, aye. Miss Cortez Masto, aye. Mr. Warnock, aye.
Everybody, before this is over, make sure you smash that like button for the new stream. I know this is not our normal content, but we'll be live again tomorrow doing charts. You know how we do. Smash the like and subscribes. The more you do that, the more people will get to join us for the last few seconds here. I appreciate it. We can get these numbers up. What are we at? 300 with almost 700 watching.
Miss Ernst,
Come on, guys.
no.
You're better than that. Also, while you have a minute, jump in the Discord. Links pinned to the top of the chat. Check out Patreon if you're looking to invest in yourself.
Mr. Haggerty,
Still time to
Mr.
sign up.
Haggerty, no.
Come on. Will they be voting on the bill today? They're voting right now, but today, it's going to be a hard call. It's going to be a hard call. Vote yes on liking the stream.
Mr. Blunt,
Ligon.
no. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Coons, aye. Miss Hirono, aye. Mr. Cruz, no.
Mr. Crown?
Mr. Scott.
Mr.
Scott of Florida,
Carouse Crown. Mr. Carouse Crown. Votes. No? Yes? Whatever's better. Mr. Carouse Crown.
Mr. Braun, no. Mr. Sass, no. Mr. Daines, no. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Rounds, no. Mr. Murphy, aye. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Lujan, aye. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Johnson, no. Mr. Wyden, aye. Ms. Smith, aye. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Sullivan, no. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Tillis, no. Mr. Tuberville, no. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Langford, no. Mr. Markey, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Miss Cinema, aye. Mr. Young, no. Mr. Hoven, no. So. Mr. Manchin, aye. Ms. Duckworth, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 47. The nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. The President will be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate will resume legislative session. The Senator from Illinois.
Absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.